Hey everyone, this is Chris, and instead of the normal episode of One Cross Radio, we are instead going with something a little bit different. Now, I mentioned the last episode that things have been a bit chaotic lately, and I was debating doing a brief break. I am going to be moving forward with that, especially because during one of the weeks where we'd have a scheduled episode, I'm actually going to be away down in Florida celebrating my 9th anniversary with Jill. So we're going to take a bit of a break. So we will be back on Monday, November the 13th. So we'll be back the second full week of November. And today's episode that I'm sharing is actually from my other show, the Radio Arcade podcast with my boo Christian. This audio is actually from an episode that we took out. We were looking at Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, those fantastic Zelda games. And then we got off topic for about 30 minutes on Star Wars, the video games, directions the movies have gone, and all that. So Christian was awesome and saved the audio. We were like, it's a decent conversation. It's just out of nowhere in this Zelda-themed episode. So he sent it to me, so I'm going to share that in this feed. You'll also see the link to the Radio Arcade podcast. I'd love it if you guys go check it out. It's very different than what we do here on OCR. But it is a lot of fun and something I enjoy doing and am proud of. And Christian does so much work on it. It's insane. The guy works his butt off. So all that being said, I hope you enjoy this episode, this detour, and we will be back on November the 13th. Take care, and God bless, my friends, and enjoy. Peace!
It's one of those things where, as a Star Wars fan and a Star Wars game fan, I've been like, man, they have to rein in the lightsaber in the games. They have to.
What do you mean?
Because otherwise...
to make it challenging, right? Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise it's like, no, this stormtrooper with their thicker armor would not matter. And no, I don't have to go unlock this. I'm just going to do the Qui-Gon thing and stab through the door and melt it. Like, you gotta... It's one of those things where I'm like, that'd be dope. But then it'd also be like, I wouldn't need to power up. I wouldn't need to do anything. Well, I could just kill everybody.
Here's the thing, right? Yeah. There's this aspect of like, okay, I enjoy this aspect of gaming, but everything has been sort of turned into an RPG in some degree or another these days. Like almost every game has an RPG element. So, I mean, we can kind of forego that where it's more linear and you're just sort of doled out powers. But, I mean, I guess that does happen with Jedi Survivor and Outcast or whatever, but like... so your powers are sort of doled out as you play the story, but at the same time you can upgrade them at your leisure and make them different or better. But so that was a big issue with Jedi Survivor, where people are like, dude, why is it taking me like 3 hits, 4, 6, 10 hits to get through the Stormtrooper? I should be able to just like slice right through them. And that was my first reaction, like your argument, which is the devs' argument, which is a lot of people's argument, or not. Maybe it's not your argument, but that's the one you shared, right?
And it's not even to pick on that game. It's also, that was the thing also with like Force Unleashed, where even though you had him chopping limbs, like still according to a lightsaber mechanics, from the novels, from the movies. It's like, nah, one hit across the chest, that dude's done. But you can't do that necessarily in the game.
Well, here's my argument, right? Now, like, a lot of people level the same criticism, and my thought is, well, if they've managed to make it interesting in Star Wars for decades, I'm certain there's probably a way you can make it interesting in the game, right? So, something like that would be like, okay, maybe make combat more difficult. With respect to, you're not just button mashing, hit, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how you would do it.
Yeah.
I'm not a game designer. I'm not getting paid that money. They are to innovate, right? If they're worth their salt, they'll do some innovating. And the other thing is like, just give you more enemies. I mean, we've seen so many Jedi die because they were overwhelmed, right? Yeah. So make your guy a little less powerful. Make the enemies more powerful. Make them more abundant. And then like obviously allow the lightsaber to work like if that physical thing would work in the physical world, right? Like, I've been seeing mods for Jedi Survivor where people actually like just increase. So like you are just cutting through people. You're cutting their arms off, cutting their heads off, cutting them in half. And I'm like, I don't care how easy it is, dude. It's real. Like, that's the way it would work, right? And that's what I want to see.
Yeah.
I don't, yeah.
Yeah. And like in some of the books and stuff, there was like rare metals and blah, 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 where I'm like, okay, whatever. You're giving me a story reason. I can go with this. I can roll with this.
Yeah.
Like, the Empire trying to get a lock on all that metal would make sense, because even though they're like, we took down all the Jedi, Sidious with his plans upon plans would of course be like, well, let's implement this though, just in case.
Yeah. I got two things I want to ask you. So, I know how when people are crapping on the sequel trilogy, you're like, well, people do that with the prequels, and then they came around and stuff. And I actually saw a meme on Star Wars memes that addressed that argument, because like, it's been 5 years. How you still think it sucks? And everyone was like, yes, absolutely. Like, there's no. And to me, I was like, oh, for sure. Like, I haven't gotten even a little bit more charitable. And if anything, it's stealed me away the amount of time it's gone by. So, because to me, it wasn't like, it wasn't necessarily like, this isn't exactly how I want Star Wars to be. It's like, no, this is a bad, you're on a character. It doesn't matter if you're like not adhering to the lore or whatever. I don't really, that's not the bigger thing to me. Like, it's poor character writing. You're crapping on all the movies that came before. The entire story, you're just kind of wiping your ass with it. And it's just, I'm still like, I can't imagine in 5 years from now where if you ask, like, I'd be like, I'm not actively hating it. I don't think about it or whatever, right? But if you ask me, I'm like, it has not changed. It will not change. It will never change. I will never feel good about these movies, right? And I'm just curious if we are going to see that change, because I feel like I don't feel like there's a lot of room for people to change their minds. I feel like there's a camp that likes it and defends it, and there's a camp that doesn't, and I don't really see them crossing over or anyone really changing their mind. What do you think?
So an advantage I'd give the prequels over that, because I did see a lot of those criticisms. Like, to me, there's a lot of crossover. The hard-headedness of the criticisms is where I see a lot of similarities. But where Lucasfilm and stuff had an advantage over the sequel trilogy is they didn't leave it alone afterwards, right? Like, the prequel era became like, even though there were books in the New Jedi Order and taking place after, it became fertile ground for them to explore. So comics were doing the stories within that. Books were doing the stories within that. Video games, stuff within that era was happening that fleshed it out. Shows like the Clone Wars were happening that took this stuff that, for the most part, the fan base had, a large section of the fan base had maybe not universally rejected, but crapped on. And then there was stuff that did it where it's like, okay, that initial take wasn't good, but
we're going to take stuff from it because there is ground here to go on. There is story to flesh out. Like, it can be done better, even if we can't erase what came before. The sequel trilogy, to my knowledge, is not getting that aspect. It's simply not. There was one, I can think of one book, I just can't remember the name, that took place between or before the sequel trilogy, but it was to set up stuff that happened primarily in Rise of Skywalker. It was to get those things set and dive into Rey's backstory and flesh out that, like, the Palpatine connection of it and all that. And that, I was like, this is really good. It's a really good book. And it actually explains stuff more. And it's that kind of thing where it made stuff more palatable that the sequel trilogy, I think, needs that. It will never erase the errors that it had because it was not planned out properly. It simply wasn't. But I'm in the camp of, like, I don't want it just retconned because that's also never been Star Wars' bag. I think there can be stuff you can recover from this if you put in the effort. But they're not doing that yet. So right now, I'm like, I don't think in 5 years, because they're not doing enough to be like, hey, let's expand.
Yeah.
Let's make this more palatable.
Okay, so to speak to that, like, I would think, you think that, like, well, because they're, it's owned by Disney, they're a company, they want to make money, right? And so they're not going to invest money into something that's not going to make them money back just to, like, fix bad writing. So I think that's sort of what's happening here, where we're seeing there isn't a market for this kind of content. People don't want it. It's not going to be profitable, right? Like, I would imagine if the sequel trilogy was anywhere near as
So I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, if it was anywhere near as popular as the prequel trilogy, we'd be seeing a lot more content set in that time period, right?
I'm going to say yes and no. I do think it's a tricky thing because the frank reality is we cannot say that the sequel trilogy was a failure financially.
No.
It simply wasn't.
It wasn't.
It made bank.
Yeah.
It was still a financial success, and there was an audience for it.
Yeah.
Just younger kids.
But then they saw the movie, and now there's no longer an audience for it.
but that's where I'll argue a bit, just because working, like, this year, working in a school, if kids saw me with Star Wars stuff, the stuff they'd be like, oh, I love Rey and I love that, and part of my nerd boy rage was like, no, but then part of me is also like, hey, look, if that's your gateway, it's cool. Like, I get to talk to a little kid about Star Wars. That's kind of fun. When I was a little kid, when we were kids, did people be like, oh, let's talk Star Wars beyond our parents? Not really. So that part was
that's weird.
Like, it's that kind of thing where I've seen that little bit where it's like a younger crowd is into it. They're into they're coming to school for show and tell with, like, Rey or Finn or Poe action figures, where I'd be like,
there's nothing cool about those characters.
But to them there is. And I think
Chris, I guess if your only toy growing up was like a turd in a jar, then, like, yeah, you'd be like, oh, this is pretty cool, Like, I mean, it's literally all I got, so I might as well enjoy it.
And it's also why, like, a while ago when they dropped the news of like the flicks that are coming out, the two I'm most excited for are Filoni's and the Rey one. Just because the Rey one, I'm like, hey, now's where you can do this character justice. Now's where you can do this character well. Because it's also not like, hey, we've got to tie it into everything else where you didn't have to. And Rey gets, like, I like the sequel characters in the sense of when I see them, I'm like, you had promise.
Oh,
you could have,
man.
You could have been good, and now it's like, okay,
with Rey, for example, it's like we're 15 years later. It's like, cool. Now you just get to be Rey, and I get to watch Daisy Ridley potentially perform the crap out of that role.
Yeah, it's like,
so that part I'm excited for.
Yeah, and if she's remarkably different than she was in the sequel, it doesn't really matter because she changed so much without any explanation in the sequels, and also apparently we can just change characters dramatically without giving you any backstory whatsoever and then murder them. So I guess we can just do whatever we want because who cares about writing good stories or characters, right? I don't. It's left
I'm with you.
a bad taste in my mouth, dude. I don't hate women. I'm not a misogynist. I don't hate Rey because she's a woman. I hate Rey because she's just a dog character. And I would have loved? I would have loved to see. Now, this is something that a lot of people, everyone is like, okay, obviously, here's what should have happened. And I think everyone knows this. I mean, if they were going to like invoke the original trilogy in any way, which they did throughout, right? Which I think honestly, like, could have been done right. It wasn't. But I also think it takes away from the new characters. You're definitely like you're not giving people enough to get attached to those new characters, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's that, but also if Rey was the evil one and Kylo was the good one, right? If they somehow like switched at some point, maybe in the second one or something, like that would have been so much more compelling. And I think I wouldn't be angry at to me, one of the biggest slaps in the face is she's a Skywalker now. And I'm like, I get the idea of like, you aren't your name, you aren't your parents, you aren't, any of that. I just don't think that was earned in any, like, even like 1% by anything we saw in any of the story. And so, I mean, it just seemed like a bunch of things happening and people doing things because that's what the story needed to in order to end. And I thought it was so bad. It was just, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
No. And like that's the thing. Unlike the prequels,
mm-hmm.
where there's fan edits that make me actually enjoy the existing films more,
mm-hmm.
my issues with the films of the sequel trilogy, I'm like, there's no amount of fan editing is going to improve the films for me. What I think could help, because people were down not only on the prequels, they were down for a long while on that whole era. It was like, no, let's just get back to Luke and Han and stuff. This is dumb. And yet, there was a lot of fertile ground there, and they developed those stories very well. The sequel trilogy, they've done a couple books, but it was to set it up, but they didn't stay in that era well. It was still like beforehand. It was still like the Mandalorian era, mm-hmm. almost. I think they can do stuff with the characters if they flesh stuff out. Like, hey, how is Rey feeling? Knowing she's a Palpatine. Like, how is that? Like, diving into that, the Poe stuff, it could have been done better. I think a different medium could do that story better. But as a visual, I don't think I'll ever really enjoy those films. I'd like to enjoy the story more, and maybe just not on as film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't. It's... Yeah.
Yeah.
They should have got the Majora's Mask writers in there to take a swing. Let me get something of substance and quality. Oh, that bums me out.
Like, to me, there's story beats from it where I'm like, I don't hate that story beat. Like, Rey being a Palpatine, I'm like, that's a dope story idea. Like, that could actually be, to me, that could be really cool. Palpatine surviving, I'm like, hey, he did in Legends, and they made it work for me. I'm fine with this Machiavellian character having plans upon plans, but don't just do it like somehow he survived. Like, nah, son, actually me through this.
It was just,
aside from shit, sorcery, or like the dark side is a pathway to many abilities, where I'm like, okay, but flesh it out a little bit.
Oh, it's definitely like
just a minuscule amount.
throwing at a wall strategy, and then we'll just have this happen, and why not add that in without any, we won't explain it, we won't, show any sort of growth or any context towards it in any way, and then it'll just happen, and then people will just feel these things, and then this will just happen, and it's like, that's not a story, it's just a random series of events happening that you're suggesting have anything to do with each other. Sorry.
Yeah, no. The sequel trilogy has, and sorry, we're just a little down. It's one of those things where, weirdly enough, there was some stuff in the recent Bond films that reminded me of it, where it's like you're jumping to this is a thing, and this is an important thing, where you haven't earned that. You're going for one of my biggest issues with Spectre, and I'm not even the biggest Bond guy, but with Spectre, it was like, hey, we're bringing in Blofeld and the characterization of Spectre. And that's Bond's Joker, where it's like, that was never Bond's Joker in the original movies. And now you're shoehorning this in, trying to give it emotional importance. And then in the last one, it's like, oh, we're building up to this scene where it's the slow, dramatic coming together. And it's like, bruh, they've been on screen together for 20 seconds or 20 minutes tops. I have no sense of this history because you just got this character in the last movie and you're telling me this is important, but none of the things that you have done has made me feel this at all.
Yeah, that's not compelling or interesting.
His chair does not need to take 30 seconds to get here. Just get him here.
Well, yeah, and when it's like that, it's like, why am I even watching a movie? Just give me a synopsis. Give me a 1-2 paragraph thing, and then okay, so I learned a story about these two guys. They apparently had a history with each other, and there's a conflict, and now it's resolved. Okay, cool. I don't that's not that's not an experience. You watch a movie to have an experience, right?
Exactly. Say what you will about the quality of the storytelling in the prequel trilogy, you still felt that final lightsaber fight between Anakin and Obi-Wan. That had that did have an emotional oomph to it. There was that earned. You can pick apart some of the stuff on the way to it, but it still had that oomph. That wasn't there in the sequels or other films because it's like, oh, well, we're going to rush to the emotional stuff, but you got to earn that emotional stuff.
Yeah. What's interesting is that, I was thinking about his fight with Obi-Wan in the fourth movie, right? And that is a lot of, you were just being told that these people have had a past and a history. And so it's you, but the viewer isn't, they're not reacting to that. They're reacting to what we've seen Obi-Wan, we're reacting to Luke losing him. Not these two guys who apparently had a beef for their entire lives. We're reacting to because then we see Luke and he's like, no! And the only reason we're attached to Obi-Wan or care that he just died is because everything we've seen him do now, not the thing of these are two mortal enemies and stuff like that. And it's oh wow, that must have been very poignant. I mean, or that must be very important or an epic thing. I did not experience that because I have no clue who these guys are, or I haven't seen any of their interactions or any of that.
I don't know who this old man is or who this walking Etch-a-Sketch robot is. But to actually give, because it's to me it's harder to do, but to give the sequel trilogy credit, I thought there was one moment that actually did have an earned emotion. Two. I'll go with two. Two moments in Rise of Skywalker that actually had an emotional reaction that was earned. One was Chewie's reaction to Leia's death. You felt that. And that was a case of they delivered everything because now it's Chewie's lost Han. Chewie's lost Leia. He's lost Luke. Chewie's adjusted family is gone. But then also the scene where Kylo interacts with the vision of Han. I loved the hell out of that scene. And they had done enough with Kylo throughout the sequel trilogy, even though it's like, all right, we're going to level him up and he won't be changed. Now he is the big bad, kind of. In the last one, they still did enough where it was like he seemed to second guess before killing Han, but then the hesitancy with killing Leia, that I'm like, you know what? Yeah, someone showing him genuine like love and affection like Rey did. I could buy that getting him to this place where he would now be like having this interaction with like not the Force ghost of his father, but that, like I could buy that dialogue. I'm like, man, if everything else in these movies delivered as well as those two bloody moments did, we'd be having a very different conversation.
Yeah, the moment that like nailed me was when he kills Han. Like that was to me like the most poignant scene in the entire. Like that was like.
So I wanted that to be for me, but it was one I saw coming so far away, but only because I'm like, when Harrison Ford was coming back, I'm like, he's not coming back for all three of these. He wanted his character to die in Jedi. He's dying here. And so when we were getting to that moment, I'm like, it's an emotional moment. It's a good moment, but I also know it's coming, so I can't get too wrapped up into it.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I never really thought of that. It never even occurred to me. Yeah, I assume that, like, it was one of those things where, you know, you're thinking it's going to happen, and then there's a moment where you're like, maybe it's not. And then, it's like, oh, God! Like, that surprised me just as much. It was like I was getting stabbed by the lightsaber, right?
I was like, if I didn't know, because there was a great documentary, when the original trilogy first got released on DVD, where Harrison was like, he thought Han should have died in Empire or in Jedi. Like, he thought his character getting to that point where he's going from like the shooting first, like all about him, to somebody who would be willing to like sacrifice himself for his friends. Like, that's a poignant story. And he's just kind of like, knowing that he thought he should have died, when he's coming back, I'm like, he's coming back to die. That's the only reason. If I didn't know that, this scene would have sucked me in more because they did a good job. But I'm just like, oh no, he did. Just as soon as they make you think maybe not, I'm like, no, this guy's their wannabe Vader. He's not going to be Vader. And an old man's going to... So,
yeah, that's the other thing too. Like, he murders both of his parents and then he switches back. Like, what? What the hell is that? Like,
they actually didn't have him kill Leia, and that was something I was wondering what they were going to do with, because it was the other people.
It's not like he didn't attempt. Like, if he just didn't succeed, it's like I mean, I think all the relevant implications are still there.
Well, yeah, he was part of it, but it wasn't. It's different than in the sense of like with Han. He pulled the trigger. He pressed the button, and he actually personally did it. But with Leia, they did the thing of like he was constantly like, "Can I do this?" And then someone else did it. So for me, that left enough wiggle room, and also he did see the hesitancy beforehand, and not the jovial reaction that other Sith do when they're like, "Yeah, I killed them all, not just the men, but the women and the children too."
Yeah, well, I think it leaves wiggle room technically, but from like in the sense of like 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, it leaves you some wiggle room for the story to make sense still. But like, to me, it's like it's even worse. Like, I'd rather see him just straight up murder both of them and then change, instead of like, okay, I just killed my dad. I'm sort of wondering if I can maybe kill my mom. Like, now you're going to choose to be waffly about it? What? Why? How? When did you, like, if anything, like, that doesn't make sense from a human perspective. It would make far more sense for him to murder them both straight up and then regret it, as opposed to be like, maybe I shouldn't kill my mom now. Wait, what?
Right.
Like, you were just willing to stab your, like, face to, like, right in his face, kill him. And now you're kind of like, maybe I shouldn't. Like, you should either be like, I messed up, that was messed up, or you should be full in. And to me, showing the hesitation is actually unrealistic. I don't think I would say that he's I'm not saying that he wouldn't be hesitating on the inside or he wouldn't be conflicted on the inside, but I can't imagine, or like to some degree, like somewhere back there. But from what I understand of human beings, he would immediately overcompensate for that. Like he would, just straight up.
Oh, and I'm not going to say it couldn't have been it absolutely could have been done better.
Yeah.
My take though with the hesitancy with Leia was regret.
Yeah.
About killing Han.
I mean, I'm saying like he would.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's I feel like it's like we technically have to show this, or maybe
they needed to do more, because like one of the things that like people would criticize Hayden's performance in Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And, like, I'll admit, myself as well. But I thought, like, that dude showed emotion so well. Like, so after he did these malicious, horrible things, like, him breaking down to Padme about killing all the men and women, like, yes, he's spitting it out vehemently. Like, I agree with what I did. And then he collapses and like tries, and he's like, "I'm a Jedi. I should be better than this." Like that shows the emotional turmoil. His face shows, even though his words are telling something else. But then also in Revenge of the Sith, after he murks all the Separatists, like you get him standing there and that tear, and it's like that's his regrets over this stuff that he's doing.
Yeah.
They could have shown it so much better, because you need something to inform it.
Yeah, with respect to Kylo and Anakin, because no matter what, even after watching everything, reading everything, I'm still like, that switch is still really difficult to like get on board with. Like it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like,
oh yeah. No. Well, how many memes and stuff point out like Anakin becoming a Force ghost, and then the Force ghost of all the younglings that he murdered showing up.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I mean,
and some of the books did do a good job of it.
Yeah.
Because they'd be like, Leia would have conversation, like Force ghost Vader would try to show up to Leia, and she'd be like, yeah, look, this is great, but you still had a part in murdering my entire planet. Like, one right decision doesn't undo this. So they did it. They expanded on it really well, and they made the thing of both children not idolizing Darth Vader, being like, yeah, he was the chosen one. Look what that got him. And he was a very flawed, messed up person.
Yeah,
who did right and a lot of wrong.
It's interesting. I guess he was supposed to bring balance to the Force in the sense that he kills the Emperor and dies. Like he was never the chosen one in the sense that like with any act or like with any, he was just the chosen one in the sense that like he would have to be murdered by his son. That's the chosen. Like that's in the sense where he's the chosen one, right? Where he's going to have to be sacrificed. Like so it's interesting because like. You can make the argument that he's not the chosen one because he became evil, but and here's one of my biggest giant issues with the sequel trilogy, where the whole point of him being the chosen one was to sacrifice himself to kill the Emperor, essentially, right? And like die by his son's hand. Not his, Luke didn't kill him, but you know what I mean, right? And the whole sequel trilogy just kind of undercuts that. It's like, no, he wasn't the chosen one. That wasn't the thing, even though we talked about it for 6 entire movies over the span of 4 decades. And it's just like, I don't know. And it just made me realize, I'm like, oh, I'm stupid for caring about Star Wars. That's the only thing I've learned from this entire series. Like, it's dumb. Like, okay, they had laser swords. I don't think it's, just appreciate the laser swords and then move on with your life, right? Like, just, like, if you can find footage of these laser swords being used, you should watch it, but that's the extent to which you should invest yourself in Star Wars. Because that's the only thing I ever cared about, really. I'm like, I like the laser swords, I like the Force powers, I like the idea of, like, a knight with, like, mystical powers who has, like, a philosophical, what is it? Like, not a religion, but, like, a worldview, whatever, right, that he has to adhere to. And it just seemed that's the most interesting, like, Jedi's, lightsabers, the Force, That's all I care about. I don't care about smugglers or politics or literally any other archetype that Star Wars has provided in any other fashion. I don't care about any of it. Just give me more lightsabers. That's all. I mean, this is we're gonna go for another hour, and I'm just gonna keep talking. So the only thing anyone should ever watch about Star Wars are those fan-made lightsaber duel videos that last for like 15 minutes. That's the only thing you should ever watch or consume. Don't give Disney any money. Don't. No, okay. I want to get off Star Wars. We should actually just get off here because I think.
No, I do gotta get going in a minute. I was just gonna quickly say what I think you're passionate about.
Yeah.
Isn't like, yeah, right now it's in the form of Star Wars. You're passionate about storytelling.
Yeah.
That's where your passion is. That you're not angry about like, oh, the lightsaber. It's like, no, you're angry about bad storytelling. That's the thing that irks you about it.
Yeah.
That's the case.
Yeah, I'm an idiot, and if I can find flaws in your story, then you're story, right? If someone as dumb as me knows that you up, then yeah, like you really did. You shouldn't be making stories. Everybody gets
the
one.
other thing I was gonna the other thing I was gonna ask you before we go.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, no. I did have one other anecdotal Star Wars related thing. The funny thing to me that came out around the time of the sequels, and it's still around, is people being like, why'd you have to make it all political? It's like, bruh, the name Wars is in the name.
I found
the original thing was looking at Vietnam along with fantasy elements. The prequel trilogy starts off about taxation of trade routes. That's boring politics. It's politics. Star Wars has always been political.
Here's a rule, and I really don't like to make rules about people or life or stuff like that because not most, I think like 99.9% stuff isn't black and white, but I think this is a rule. I think you can just follow this and be okay. Where if someone says they don't like politics in their video games or media, they actually love politics in their video games and media. They don't love the politics they're seeing. That's it.
Yeah,
so,
they don't enjoy it when it's not their politics or their beliefs.
I don't believe anyone when they say that. I don't. I'm like you were. So, you don't. You're just seeing you're just seeing stuff that you don't like, and now you're like, I don't want politics. It's like you would have been fine. Like I'm sure you love like like an Anne Rind novel or something, or like I'm sure you would love that, but I just can't think of any actually like overt right wing or conservative art. Like, I don't think they make art that people want to consume. even a lot of people who hold the same political views are like, wait, this band I've loved is left wing? Like, what the? Why is the whole Rage Against the Machine thing? Where it's like, what machine did you think they were telling you to rage against, dude? Like, do you even have any idea who the members are or why they can't? Like, do you like it? Just it reeks of like.
Or the surprise of, you texted me about, like, a person being surprised about punk bands.
Oh, yeah, like, punk bands being left-wing or anarchists and stuff. And it's like, what do you think they're like, hey, man, you should go to church, put on a suit, throw some, I don't know. Yeah, it's wild. Yeah. It's the cognitive dissonance occurs, and I'm like, maybe there's a thread here. Maybe there's other things in which they're not really picking up on the obvious point, right? Anyway.
Yeah.
That's the Radio Arcade podcast.
Final question.
Too long, it's a brand new song. It's a